Marie, to get us started with this interview, and thank you for doing this, you were born in Spartanburg, South Carolina, went to school, grammar school there, and then tell us about going to college. Where did you go?
I affiliated with Wofford College in Spartanburg, South Carolina. Took the anatomy and chemistry and whatever required for nursing training. Trained in Spartanburg General Hospital. And I had the idea about going in training when I was 9 years old, and my sister had an appendectomy, and I thought the nurses were angels. So that's when I made the decision to go.
Well, good. And when you finished nursing school, where did you go then?
When I finished nursing, we got orders. We'd stood the boards and passed, and we had already signed up with the Red Cross Reserve and Army Cadet Corps, and we got orders before we even finished our last week of training to go to Camp Rucker, Alabama, to the first group of nurses, basic training, and it was October of 1943. Then we had 6 weeks of training. We were eligible for overseas duty, nursing duties, medical responsibility at that time. Then from Fort Benning, after 6 weeks, I was assigned to Fort Benning Regional Hospital. And by the way, we were AWOL. We didn't know what that meant, but we were late getting there that day that we arrived, and we were assigned to units.
All right, now, by this time then, you were in the Army. Did they have the Army Nurse Corps at that time?
I was an Army Nurse Corps. The minute I arrived in Fort Rucker, Alabama, we had passed our boards, and they had was eligible to be a registered Army nurse.
So you became a second lieutenant, I assume?
Second lieutenant immediately.
Army Nurse Corps. All right. So now you're in the Army and you're a second lieutenant in the Nurse Corps. What happened next?
Well, I was assigned to a ward at Fort Benning, and I didn't listen to war stories because I was too busy getting adjusted to Army life, and met a young lieutenant from Baton Rouge, Lieutenant Spurlock. We went to the officers and nurses building every night for a little dinner or dance, and then it was I was there about a year before I got I got orders to go. But you want me to tell you about that?
Yeah, I want to hear about how you got the orders to go. That was a kind of a surprise, I think.
It was a surprise because we didn't expect to go. We forgot about the war. So we went to one morning, 9 o'clock one morning, I was making rounds on B5 at Fort Benning, Georgia, and I heard a voice say, "Lieutenant, you have orders." And I looked around, I thought it was a doctor, and he said, you are to leave Fort Benning by noon and go to the port of embarkation as soon as you can get there. They have an emergency, they need more medical people, units in Battle of Normandy. And so we had 3 hours to pack, and when I went back to my B12 where I lived, my roommate was packing, and we laughed and cried, and I said, "How am I going to get in touch with my boyfriend?" One of the nurses took care of that, and we said a tearful goodbye and left the Columbus, Georgia, and 16 hours later arrived in Brooklyn, New York to go overseas. And at that time, when we looked at the orders, we found out the other 4 classmates, 6 of us went into Ozark, Alabama, and 2 just went to Benning, and the other 4 went to Jackson, Mississippi. anyway, they were on the list to go to with us, and well, you could hear us screaming and crying about the time their train arrived in Brooklyn, New York. We went in and had a wonderful reunion on the ship up until the time about 2 days. 2 days before we arrived to our destination. We didn't know really where we were going. We thought we were going to England.
Now, do you remember the name of the ship you were on?
I think it was called Aquitania, but I'm not sure.
And so you left New York to go
to Cherbourg, to Utah Beach. We didn't know we were going to Utah Beach until about 2 days out, and then they said we were going direct into combat. That the Battle of Normandy was aggressing, and they need medical people, and then set up field hospitals around St. Lo, St. Mary d'Eglise, and so we ended up right in the middle of the war. In fact, the ship, just before our ship, that was blown up. It was blown up before we got off that ship. We got off the ship, the water was high, and we had to climb down that rope, and the bullets were flying, and I have a picture of that.
Marie, right here, let me interrupt a minute. Do you remember what date that was when you arrived at Utah Beach?
I don't remember the date. We left Benton in July, and I don't remember the date because it took 2 weeks after that. It took 2 weeks after that, but I don't remember the date. I've had, and neither did, I tried to look that up on my records and I didn't see it.
Well, that's all right. Now, when you arrived on the ship, how did they get you to the beach?
On barges, only we had to climb down. The infantry division went over first. We couldn't talk to them. We were not allowed to talk with the infantry. And we climbed over the ropes and into the water, and I said, I can't swim. Then anyway, we had help and barges up on those barges, and it was raining and the bullets were flying, and we got on into, finally we could see trucks, open GI trucks waiting for us. They didn't know where to take us because our advance party was in England. We had no place set up. So we went all night long on the truck. Next morning we ended up in a field hospital which was called the 57th Field Hospital, and they put us up to, we were wet, and they fed us a little bit, and we got dry, and we had to set up a field hospital. And that was not far from the 57th. It was 15 miles outside of Cherbourg, France. So then we immediately started getting wounded soldiers. It was really at the time the paratroopers had just gone in and blown up that area. And in I think it was St. Mary d'Eglise, where the parachute was on the church, and we wounded patients, so many that we never had any time off. They had to go right into surgery. They went in. My first assignment, as soon as it was set up in a cow pasture, it was to night duty. I had 5 wards, and the mines were around there, snipers, and each night when I made rounds, everybody got a shot of penicillin. I had a ward boy on each side of me, and I'd sit on the bed and say, "You're going home." Some did and some didn't. They were screaming and hollering, and we had very little time to sleep and no water to take baths with, about 2 cups of water a day. But the hours were long, and we made our own supplies. We had to do our own supplies, cotton balls, roll them, and fold gauze. And so...
Well, that was quite a time. Now, how long were you, quote, in battle, and what happened there?
Well, I was in battle, I was there a year, just about almost a year. But I was thrown from a Jeep and going into Sherburne to get uniforms. I was assigned that duty, and another nurse and I was in the front of that Jeep, and it was thrown, a mine hit the front of that Jeep, and I was thrown out and down the embankment. And we didn't have specialty then, only medicine, internal medicine, and surgeons mainly. So they didn't diagnose me. I had that 8th cranial nerve hit, knocked that ear out, and back injuries. However, that didn't stop me from doing my duty. I was in bed about 2 weeks.
All right, now that was back injury and
The ear.
hearing loss in one ear, right?
Yeah, 8th cranial.
Yeah.
I wasn't diagnosed for a year or two later. So I acted like I was young. I was 19, so I didn't make any issue out of it.
All right, now when it was, after all of that, God bless you, and it was time to come back to the States, how did that occur?
That occurred through, after the war was over, I see a picture of VE Day in May, and I was one of the first ones that sent back. I came back through a hospital ship into Salisbury, England, and then on that hospital ship, the same doctor that I was making rounds with at Fort Benning, Georgia, was in charge of that ship. So I got super treatment.
I bet you did.
And then I came into Charleston, South Carolina.
And then from Charleston, where did you go for the next
McGuire
assignment?
General in Richmond, Virginia.
And then, what were you doing there?
Well, they were doing tests to see what was really, they didn't know really what my diagnosis was. Since I acted like it was fine, and they said, no, we're going to check you. And I went to McGuire General, and they didn't find it then because they didn't have the proper doctors that knew. See, it was a head injury, and they didn't diagnose it as such.
All right, now, your next assignment was where?
My next assignment, I went to Miami and got reassigned, and they said, where do you want to go? And I said, Fort Benning. I went back to Fort Benning, and then I was assigned to Ward 15, and this is where, and then the nurse that lived next door to me had not been in the ward, but she was on that ward, and she said, we just have one bedridden patient, the rest of them are convalescent, but I want you to meet the convalescent patient. So she set it up for me to meet these 4 lieutenants at the nurse's doctor's dining room, and one of them, she's sitting next to me, is the man I married.
All right, now listen here. What happened to the first boyfriend? You left him out there now, and now you've got another one, and you married Dick Murray, good friend of mine. So, Marie, tell us about the...
Don Spurlock got wounded in the Battle of the Bulge. In fact, I have a letter saying, describing what was all around him, and I received that letter. He had just been in the Battle of Bulge about 2 weeks. He'd just been in France about 2 weeks when he got hit, and he got his leg paralyzed, and he went to numerous hospitals, one after the other one, and we never did get to meet because I was crippled and he was, and he was from Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and he went to Texas to a hospital in the USA, and we rode, but the distance was too far away, and that's when Dick Murray was very persuasive. He was when I met him, but in the meantime, he was on a ward that Bob Dole was on. Bob Dole was the only bedridden patient, and he had his hand up in the sling, and I didn't remember Bob Dole. My husband told me later, said, "You remember that patient that was bedridden?" Said, "That was Bob Dole." And so recently I found out from Bob Dole about by somebody with the TV station went up, and she told him about the nurses at Fort Benning in Ward 15, and he said, "Well, it's been so long ago, I remember the cute nurses, but I don't know their names." He said, "I appreciate them thinking about me."
Well, that's good, and I'm sure he remembers you. Now, Marie, we're about to get to the point here now. Well, you married Dick Murray when you were still on duty?
No,
duty?
Dick Murray, we were 2 years after I left Benning. After I got out of service in February of that 46, and Dick Murray didn't get out. He was in for another 6 months, and he when he got out, he went back to New Jersey, and I went to Baltimore to John Hopkins to get some extra training, so it would be easier for Dick Murray to come to visit me.
That sounds like an ulterior motive, which we all understand.
Well, we were 2 years before we were married after I met him. I was still in Spartanburg. And then, of course, as you know, later after we married, he finished Wofford and then came to Benning at Fort Gordon and became the education advisor to the Signal School at one time. Got his PhD in education, and
Well, I think I can take up there because that's about when I came across both of you. And you and Dick have been good friends of mine all the years, and of course Dick has departed now too. So you're still here, thank goodness, and looking like $1 million. And First Lieutenant, retired Army Nurse Corps, Annie Marie Murray, we thank you for your service. Is there anything else you want to say?
I think I've completed.
All right. Well, you have a lot more stories, but this is great. I think everybody will appreciate hearing from you, and particularly the honor that you bring and brought to the Nurse Corps. Thank you so much.